Hi, Gary. Welcome to the Sarah's podcast.
Hi, welcome, Stelios.
So for those that don't know, you are Gary Lewis, Head of Business Development of KTC Edible Oils and Fats, of course, and also the President of NEODA, which is, I'm going to guess this, National Edible Oils Distributions Association.
Nearly there, Stelios. It's National Oils Distributors Association.
What did I say?
Distribution.
It doesn't matter. Oh, come
Same
on.
thing. Same thing.
Yeah. So, thanks for coming on today and giving us a little bit of, your expertise and time on the current situation.
No problem.
So, give us a little bit of information about sort of how this COVID pandemic is sort of, affecting initially just business within KTC. Like, what have you all had to juggle around differently?
Well, probably the same with the industry at the moment. Luckily, our business is quite diverse. So we cover retail, food service and manufacturing. So as you can imagine, the food service side is very difficult. Mm-hmm. The retail side is explosive. So a lot of demand from the retail side and lots of demand for the manufacturing side. And that's probably the same case for everybody else in the UK and across Europe, really.
Mm-hmm. And would you say, has it been quite a massive increase within retail?
It has, and I think it's been a very big increase because the retail, everybody panic bought, as you know, so everybody wanted everything. We were already building up stock ahead of Ramadan, so it's a busy time anyway for Ramadan. So everybody came on board. Things are quite settling down a little bit, really, but the demand is still very strong. But we've still got to bring material across the world. So we don't just do oils and fats. We do lots of canned goods and other goods. But if you go back to when we first knew about this, then the issue was only a Chinese issue just a few short months ago. So we had a glimpse of that, but we never thought it would obviously reach the world, never mind the UK, in such a short time.
Have you had an issue with containers at ports and stuff like that? Because I know that apparently there's quite a lot of backlog with that.
Well, I think it's to do with planning anyway. I think we've got some good supply routes in that, but I think it will become an issue. And the whole thing about trade at the moment is it not just affects the demand side, but also people shipping. It affects the ports. Do the people at the ports get ill? Do the suppliers in China? Well, what we've seen in China, actually, they've apparently come out the other side. Mm. So they've gone through the worst of the situation, are slowly releasing. Yeah. So we have a bizarre situation at the moment where we're seeing most of the world going into this terrible phase, but we're seeing China actually come out of it and actually business as usual for China, which is bizarre. So so they're ready for business. So one, it gives us a bit of an insight to say, well, actually, we know that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, because if China, who's had the worst, although on paper they haven't had the worst, but in reality they have, major cities were shut down. But so their operation on and looking to buy products, which has a big impact on materials that we buy. So, and the world market, because 2-3 months ago they stopped buying. All the cities went into lockdown, like we're doing in the UK at the moment. And now they're basically back for business on a cautious basis.
I guess when China, the likes of China, says we're not buying anything, I guess that straight away has a massive effect on markets, doesn't it?
It does, and the implications of what's happened is obviously most of the markets we're dealing with, the palm oil market, the rapeseed market, the sunflower market, have been very supportive for some time. And what we saw at the end of 2019 is the markets rallied because there are genuine crop problems with palm oil and rapeseed oil. The market rose significantly during that period. And as a consequence of the COVID-19 situation, in January, the whole market came down sharply. Initially, it's because China wasn't buying. There were some trade disputes with India. India is also one of the massive consumer of edible oils and fats and other goods. So two major nations had either a trade dispute or a shutdown. So we saw prices come down sharply. And that has continued throughout February and throughout March. So we have a bizarre situation at the moment where all these markets that are generally very supportive are now looking relatively weak if you look at the compare. So it's in one way, it's created an opportunity for those who are working to buy oils at prices they wouldn't have been able to buy just a few months ago. In another way, obviously, on the demand side, it's very poor. So lots of uncertainties, lots of cash stimulus going in through central banks across the world. We've seen $2 trillion of American intervention. We've seen the UK. Everybody's doing the same.
Yeah.
That then comes down to how long will we be in a situation, because that may not be enough. So it's a relatively quick response. Obviously, again, China, we could be critical of China on many things, but they've come out the other side and they're trying to get back to normal. So it gives us hope to say we have to be positive and know at some point that things will return to normal.
So how have you seen, so if you've seen the sort of retail sector rally quite strong, how have you seen the food service sector on the flip side in the UK?
It's under pressure, obviously, because it's a major part of the UK market. So food service side is such a big thing that it's been limited now. Obviously, food service people are still doing hospitals and schools and certain restaurants, but it's been hit severely. And this shutdown with all the restaurants has a major impact on everybody's market at the moment.
I suppose sorry to interrupt there, but I suppose it seizes cash flow across the board, doesn't it? Really,
it does, and I think obviously the government action, what they did initially was very positive, and what they're announced today in terms of they're trying to get more cash into the market is very positive. It's about keeping people afloat, but obviously that's all depending on time. The retailers have obviously benefited massively. If you look at the amount of spend in a very short period, consumers spend over £1 billion in the same period. And that's even more than Christmas and more than Easter, which is phenomenal. But also, and that trend should continue lockdown because we all have to eat at home. So it's transferred some demand, but it's never going to be the same because we are a society that goes out several times a week to eat in different formats.
So I think I had early on in this, my thought process was, what's going to happen when supermarkets don't get repeat customers as often because the food's not being consumed? But that logic doesn't make sense because people aren't going to restaurants, so they will be consuming the food.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the negatives about that is obviously when people went out and panic bought, there was a lot of waste. Unless you have very big freezers or the answer is a lot of waste. And we've seen stories in social media and the press about waste. I think people now are calming down. I think there are positives by people, obviously, families being at home together now. And obviously home cooking has come back. So that's quite a big positive. But one thing, as you know, being in isolation, you miss some of the things you took for granted.
Yeah.
And I think going out, we're a social society. We like going to the pub. We like going to restaurants. Obviously, some restaurants are able to do home deliveries or home collections, which is fantastic. And I've also seen on social media where businesses are starting to think and adapt. So this time has been good for reflection. And what you may see, and obviously lots of things we're seeing now, is that it may change how we do things for, indefinitely. Cashless society now. Obviously, there's more focus on handing over cash. So having contactless is going to, I think, will become a bigger issue for most people. But also, I think they'll appreciate going out. And I think we've got a very strong demand for people to support the local businesses, which is good.
And I think that comes off the back of seeing a little bit of that support for the British local after the whole Brexit thing as well. Like, if you follow online, there is a strong connection to support British buy local. And I think this is probably going to reinforce that concept a little bit more as well.
I think it will, and I think the Brexit issue was one thing that was going to support it full stop anyway. But we are obviously a multicultural society. We import lots of goods. Most of the oil that we import comes from other parts of the world. Yeah. So rapeseed is the only crop we have as a domestic crop. But it will change things. People are looking about UK manufacturers, and manufacturers have stepped up. Many manufacturers in the UK are running full blast to keep up with the demand.
Wow.
You're quite right. Is there a question of how it continue? But people settle down. If it goes on another month or 2 months or whatever, people get into a pattern knowing that food is there. They don't need to rush. Yeah. People are very calm in queues. So, it's nice to see that side of things as well.
Yeah. So while I've got you on, I wanted you to school me a little bit. If the crude oil market moves up or down, how does this affect the edible oil market?
Right. One of the big things that's happened over the last 10 or 15 years is the use of biodiesel. Now, there's two different types. There's ethanol that's used in petrol, and there's biodiesel, which is basically effectively replacing part of diesel with another product. And obviously, edible oils are a very good substitute. They're sustainable. And what we've seen across the world is governments mandating use of biodiesel, usually about 10% in diesel. So it's making it more sustainable. It helps lower sort of emissions side of things as well. So if I told you that in Europe, 61% of palm oil is used either in biodiesel or for burning.
Wow.
And around 69 to 70% of all rapeseed oil is used for biodiesel. It gives you a good picture of why mineral oil is quite critical. And that's one of the reasons we've seen recently. We've seen it collapse from around $50 a barrel to $20, and it's recovered a bit today. Mm-hmm. But what that does, it makes actually biodiesel uneconomic. So if at the moment what we have a divergence, we see oil markets come down quite significantly. We've actually seen crude or mineral oil drop even sharper. So what that happens is that people who would normally mandated it makes it uneconomic. It makes it basically into negative. And we've seen users around Europe saying, actually, I'd rather pay a fine and not use it.
Oh, okay.
On the other side of it as well, obviously, the situation at the moment, the amount of people actually driving is very limited. And we're not just talking about the UK and Europe, we're talking around the world.
Yeah.
So we have with the situation in the background where we're seeing production on oil being ramped up because of a spat between Russia and Saudi Arabia before this happened. That caused the initial crash. And what we're seeing now is that basically stocks are ramping up because we're not using it. So if you look at mineral oil prices, in order to make it economic for use, mineral oil prices need to be around $60 or $70 a barrel plus. Otherwise, it's not that economic. Mm-hmm. But one thing, it's got a dual side to this as well, purely because the world has to produce more edible oils, one, to feed a rising population, particularly in in India and China and other developing worlds. But a lot of these countries themselves are introducing massive mandates. And I think Indonesia and Malaysia, who are very big palm oil producers, are increasing, or plans to increase, their biodiesel usage up to 40% in the next year. So in a way, the kind of food side of it becomes less important, actually. And I think that's the strange thing people don't realize is actually what drives edible oil prices. Yes, it is to some extent food usage, but far more, if you look at 60% for palm and 70% for rapeseed oil, it's the price or the usage of biodiesel which actually drives prices.
Wow, that's interesting. Never knew that.
Yeah. And so you've got a situation now where we have crop problems because obviously we're a global crop.
Yeah.
Most crops are only once a year. So the European rapeseed crop, for example, where it looks like because of poor planting last year, this is the third year in a row, we're going to have a terrible crop in the UK. So if you look at today's prices on rapeseed oil, they don't match with them compared to all this supportive news. And that's because sentiment is negative. If you're not doing biodiesel and food demand is subdued, there's a false connection. But what that tells us is that at some point, when we do see these sort of shoots of recovery, the market has the potential to be quite explosive on the upside. So prices could rally significantly on most commodities, particularly those crops like palm oil and rapeseed oil, where things are very supportive. So at the moment we're enjoying it, but obviously your customers and my customers can't enjoy it because we're not actually not working at the moment.
No, they've not really got. Yeah, they've not got the demand.
No, and that's it.
In some ways, it's quite similar to 2008, where commodity prices were quite low, but customers weren't eating, or at least eating out as much.
Yeah. Well, if you look at the correlation back to 2007-8, what we saw rapeseed oil prices even higher than they've been recently. We saw rapeseed prices hit £1,000 a ton, which is quite very high. Part of that is because that's the start of the biodiesel, when the phenomenal, but also you had lots of investor money in the commodity markets around the world. So at that point, investors were putting their money into many commodities around the world then, and they had massive positions. And the global financial crisis of 2007-8 caused the whole market to collapse. And in some way, we've seen a correlation to that now. Obviously, the difference at the moment is that then we had a genuine banking issue, where now the bank's actually the most secure they have been for a long time. They've got good balance sheets. The issue we have now is the UK economy. So all this intervention with governments around the world hopefully will result, obviously, in, if it's a short lockdown, which we all hope for, that business can get back to normal in a relatively quick way. The government has obviously put a lot of money into that, and obviously we've all got to pay that back at some point, but the cost of not doing anything would be more significant.
I can imagine.
So it's a tricky situation. So we know one thing we have to know is at some point it will go back to normal. Hopefully we'll go back to our habits. We may reflect on that, but I would imagine that the first thing people do when things go back to normal is go to the pub, go to a restaurant, eat out more. Yes, you'll see a bit of a swap around from the supermarkets, but they're going to have a good period anyway for that. Yeah. And I think it's probably good for people, actually. That what may happen is people may not travel abroad for a bit longer. They may limit that. So if we have a summer where we're on partial recovery from the lockdown, people may stay at home a bit more. So it may benefit the whole economy for having people stay abroad, because other parts of the world may be more affected for longer. Yeah.
And you told us a little bit about how the rapeseed market's looking. Give us a couple of minutes on palm dripping and sunflower.
Yeah, well, palm oil is probably actually one of the most supportive. Now, normally, palm oil is actually a continuous growing crop. So it's one of those things where it grows like fruit bunches and it's harvested on a regular basis. So it grows, harvest, grows, harvest. And what we saw at the end of last year is that production was falling way behind normal. It normally peaks production around September, October, November. We just didn't see that increase. But at the same time, as I mentioned before, we've seen unprecedented demand for it, for biodiesel, for food use around the world. So stock levels actually reached very low levels, because if you're not producing and demand's quite high, you're eating into stocks. And obviously it takes 2 or 3 years to build up these kind of stocks. So prices rallied right up to the end of 2019, and palm oil is now recovered. So prices on palm oil are very cheap. So I've talked about rapeseed and palm, both of those commodities. The prices today do not reflect the fundamentals. So these two products have the potential to rally significantly once there's some stability. They're what we call, they're oversold, because once the demand kicks in and we all start driving our cars, the biodiesel demand kicks in as well. Sunflower, you just talk about sunflower immediately as well, because lots of people, rapeseed oil normally is cheaper than sunflower oil, but not as cheap as soy. It's kind of in the middle. Sunflower demand is pretty strong. So people who could switch were switching away from rapeseed because it was very expensive, moving into sunflower. We all know about high oleic sunflower oil. I've talked about this and other things before. High oleic sunflower oil is a very robust oil. And most people now, because prices have been relatively good and supplies being pretty good after last year's terrible crop, most people are quite well covered. And it's the same thing on most commodities. People are actually covered towards the end of the year. And the difference is now they're either not calling it off yet, it just means they're going to defer it. The other big thing that we've not talked about, which has an impact on things like dripping, because a lot of dripping is imported. Lots of dripping is moved around the world. Is actually exchange rate fluctuation. So, as a consequence of obviously the action the government's taken over the last few weeks, sterling is actually weakened quite significantly against the dollar and against the euro. That has a massive impact on any commodity because on a global basis, all commodities are traded in dollars. On a local basis, it's on euros if we're dealing obviously with our friends on the continent. Yes, there's dripping producers in the UK, but it's a kind of a global market, and dripping is used in biodiesel as much as used in food. So prices more on some commodities have been a double whammy. You've had a benefit of the market collapsing, but you've had a positive in currency. Yeah. So in effect, it kind of balances itself out.
It negates.
It does. It wipes it out. If you look at sterling, actually, it was recovering quite well, despite obviously us leaving the EU earlier this year. Sterling was on the way up because the people were seeing things as in a positive basis. Sterling is relatively weak, but that all depends on their interpretation of how the government's handling. And obviously, people now see that the UK, yes, but I think the question now is whether we will leave the EU later this year or not. So in terms of commodity, any commodity, it has an impact. Currency has a major impact.
Yeah.
So dripping prices are up just on in terms of currency. Then there's a question about if you look at how do we derive dripping? It comes from a byproduct of the animal processing industry, and obviously we may be eating more meat at home from the retailers, but what's not happening is the restaurants are not buying the cuts of meat that they would normally do. So there's questions whether that will have an impact actually in terms of animal processing. And obviously in those abattoirs or any of those processing plants, are the people getting ill? Do they close? So it's tipped from being sort of a demand implication to actually start to say, the people actually produce it. If they get ill, do they process plants? If restaurants aren't taking the cuts of meat or not buying the bit, does that have an impact? Yeah. And one of the things about palm oil I've just talked about before is that there are parts of Malaysia, who's one of the two largest producers of palm oil in the world. Some of their plantations are actually closing in an attempt to try and curb COVID-19, as some of their workers are ill. So what we'll see is actually the supply side will go wrong because if you can't harvest these crops actually, if they're not harvested in time, palm oil will just go to waste.
Yeah, of course.
It's not like the crops that are sat in store waiting to be processed. Palm oil needs to be processed very quickly within a very narrow window to get good quality. If it's not processed in time, then you have poor quality. So it has different repercussions down the line.
Yeah.
And the same for things like groundnut oil at the moment. We've got a situation where it's the demand side that's fallen sharply. So theoretically, there's more groundnut, more rape, more this than we thought. And it's just a question of how long that will be down, because the big users of groundnut are India and China. China's a massive player in that market because it's big in that kind of sector. But China has been known to go into the market and buy huge quantities of these products. And one thing as a consequence of the Chinese coming out of their luck is that they're recovering, coming out of it, they need to buy huge amounts of product. They haven't bought it for a long time. And obviously the Chinese New Year is very close as well. So they will come into the market and buy lots of commodities. And as a consequence of all these markets collapsing recently, because that's effectively what they've done, it makes the prices actually very competitive.
So they almost get the benefit because the prices are still, you could argue, fairly on the cheap side for them. They buy it all. The price then starts to creep up, which means that by the time the rest of the world comes out of this, they don't see that benefit.
And that's the critical thing at the moment. Because most people, if in the UK people have bought, it's just a case of deferring it. That's fine. Because I think refiners have been very flexible with customers in the last few months because refiners are still running. We've had lots of questions from people saying, is it, what's happening in terms of supply? Supply is fine. The question is demand.
Yeah.
So if you bought and you've got that, hopefully your supplies will be flexible. So when you do come back, hopefully in the not too distant future, I would imagine that when people get a first sign of when we'll get relaxed, everybody will be stocking up weeks before that to get ready for this to be released. But you're quite right in terms of saying, if this goes on another month, China will be going into the market and buying heavily. And we'll probably start to see that already in parts of the market as well.
Yeah. So just coming to the end of this, with your role at NEODA, you were sort of on the President's Committee, the board as such, for National Fish and Chip Day. What are your thoughts regarding National Fish and Chip Day?
Well, obviously, we're very proud of all the work we've done on National Fish and Chip Day, and every year it's gone from strength to strength. And we had very big plans for this year. It's obviously clear that we can't. It's not business as usual at the moment. Now, all the people on the President's Committee are getting together next week to decide how best to take things forward. I think the consensus is that we would like it still to happen this year. It's then just a question of what format, when we should do it. So all the interested parties will be getting together, and we're reaching out to other people, NEODA members like yourself and other people, and are also working to work with the NEEF about the timing of that as well. I think this could be a good launch pad. If timing is done the right thing, it could be a launch pad for the whole industry. I would hope that obviously that everybody embrace the National Fish and Chip Day, because it is a celebration of fish and chips. And obviously after what we've been through, there's nothing more we need than to celebrate this industry as well. So hopefully we'll give some news to you in the next few weeks to say this is the plan. We have to adapt those plans, obviously, to the ever-changing situation. But I'm glad that there's a consensus that we should keep it in some format and still celebrate it. And if we go back to when we first did this event a number of years ago now, we had a very soft launch, but the response was phenomenal. So we've got far more coordinated now what we're going to do. We had some great road shows planned for this year. And if we can't do those, we'll definitely do those for next year. So, I'm looking forward to working with my colleagues next week and working with Andrew Crook from the NEEF as well about the timing for this.
Brilliant. Well, Gary, I don't want to take up any more of your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stelios.
Yeah, you give us a lot of really great information.
Thank you, Stelios. Thank you very much.
Stay safe. Talk soon.
Cheers.